Great news! There's a quick way you can save money. Switch to Geico. Geico could help you get great coverage at a great price, and it only takes 15 minutes to see if you could save 15% or more on car insurance. Go to geico.com today and see how much you could save.
This is the Best of Golic and Wingo podcast.
There is going to be a change, guys, in the way one team presents itself in Major League Baseball, starting in 2019. Cleveland Indians, in consultation with Major League Baseball and Commissioner Rob Manfred, have announced that the team will discontinue the use of their divisive logo on their uniforms of Chief Wahoo after the 2018 campaign. The decision was made mutually by Major League Baseball and the team, which had been working together to come up with an appropriate timeline and solution as this issue gained steam over the recent years. And here's the quote from Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred. Major League Baseball is committed to building a culture of diversity and inclusion throughout the game. Over the past year, we encouraged dialogue with the Indians organization about the club's use of the Chief Wahoo logo. During our constructive conversations, Indians owner Paul Dolan made clear there are fans who have a longstanding attachment to the logo and its place in the history of the team. But even with that, guys, they have decided that it is no longer appropriate for on-field use starting in 2019.
Mike, I heard you, obviously, your show get after it a bit this morning. And one of the questions I think people bring up is, wait a minute, this thing started in 1947. Why now? Why now with the issue all of a sudden with the Chief Wahoo?
Yeah, it's amazing how we sort of use sports as this area where we insulate ourselves from the progress of the rest of society. Like, there were a lot of ways in which racism was very casually woven into society back in the 1940s. I mean, hell, the 1940s had one of the most seminally racist moments in World War II as a world event going on at the time that tried to dispel a lot of this. You had people drinking out of separate water fountains back then. You had all of these things that over the course of time we looked at and said, you know what? That's not right.
Some things don't age well.
We probably shouldn't do that. Spoiler alert, saying that we've done it this way for a long time is not a good reason to keep doing something when there is inherent wrong involved in it. And so we have finally, in 2018, looked up and realized the wrong in this. We've decided for whatever reason that it still won't take place until 2019.
Yeah, I was about to say, technically 2019, which makes this whole thing a little bizarre.
Yeah,
right?
we'll definitely get into that. But, I mean, this will wash over into the Washington Redskins now, and we'll have the Commissioner, Roger Goodell, on. We'll ask him because clearly here baseball had an influence.
Yes.
Can the NFL have an – because Dan Snyder has been wholly against this,
right?
You know, in changing their nickname. Does Roger Goodell in the NFL – can they have a say in this somehow, some way? So it's something that we can get into. But I guess my only issue, Mike, and I heard you talking about it this morning, would be those, and we are in a time where you can jump on the wagon, right? The social media wagon. For those that this isn't a big issue, but they just jump on it. You know, there are a lot of people that are singing about this now, about how bad it is. Were they doing it 3 years ago? Were they doing it 4 years ago? Were they doing it 2 years ago? I mean, Can you look kind of a little bit awry at them for saying, well, why? Wait a minute, why now? For those in a position to talk about it or write about it, were you doing it 2 years ago? Were you as hot on it? Why? If you weren't, why now? Because everybody else is?
Well, everyone is a tipping point. Right? Like, everyone is a tipping point in almost any issue where something shows up enough on your radar where you say, maybe I'll take a look at this. Maybe it's a realization that you didn't have before.
Well, yeah, to that point, what you're saying, why now? But to me, the ultimate is why not now? I mean, why? Just because we finally got there doesn't mean that we're wrong to not finally have gotten there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, no.
I think that.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It going away doesn't affect me one bit.
Right.
I'm still going to watch the Indians because they don't have Chief Wahoo on it. Do you think people are going to stop? I mean, I don't know why you would. So it makes no difference to me whether they get rid of it or not.
I mean, to me personally, it was brought home. I can't remember where I saw this, but it was on the website somewhere where at the Indians home opener a couple of years ago, they actually had some Native Americans go in there outside the stadium, and people were walking onto the field, and they were dressed in the full headdress,
right.
And they literally put red stuff on their face, had painted their mouths a lot bigger so they had the big teeth like
right.
Chief Wahoo, and there was a huge discussion between some of the fans dressed like this and the Native Americans saying, you realize what you're doing is characterizing an entire race in a really discriminatory way, and seeing that juxtaposition, I was like, yeah, that's not right.
When it's put in front of you, actually,
in fact,
the look.
One of those confrontations, actually, one of the guys, I'd love to try and find that story. He came to the realization, I probably shouldn't be doing this now.
It's one of those things that it just seems so painfully obvious at this point, because I look at Chief Wahoo and people say, well, it's been that way for so long and we identify with all these positive factors about it.
The first thing that anybody will tell you in law school is the worst argument you can make is, it's always been done that way.
But we look at it now, can someone look at Chief Wahoo and tell me that was drawn with the idea of making Native Americans happy? That was drawn to be some sort of compliment to Native Americans. Like, oh yeah, look at all these positive qualities we're trying to draw out about you, about the way that we perceive you. Because caricatures have been a part of racism for a long time. Go look at any sort of early Looney Tunes cartoon.
Yeah,
go ahead. I mean, listen, if you want a history, go and Google Lazy Town and go down the rabbit hole that takes you, and let me know if you'd be comfortable seeing those images on a jersey, on a baseball cap. Let me know if you'd be comfortable seeing some of the racist propaganda from World War II, where you had yellow bucktooth figures designed to represent Asians. All those things. Would you be cool seeing that in a jersey? No. Just because you've normalized this doesn't mean it's okay, and it's not about a number of people that are offended. It's about, this is not a thing that was meant to be complimentary to this whole group of people.
So on the other side of it, and I'll go devil's advocate, because again, I don't care if it goes away. It doesn't change my, love to watch the Cleveland Indians play and try and, win that World Series. So I'm fine with it either way. How much should Native Americans be involved? You go to the Washington Redskins, what was it, 2016?
Yeah, there was a study in 2016 in the Washington Post that essentially said that 9 in 10 Native Americans say they're not offended by the Washington Redskins name.
So
that was a new poll in the Washington Post of a survey of 504 people across every state and the district.
So should that have an effect? Or should you be able to look at something and say, well, that's racist. We don't need to hear from the people that supposedly it's offending to say it's racist. But what if,
well, I certainly
again,
think, yeah.
What if I'm asking, Native Americans, 9 out of 10 said, doesn't bother me. So if they're saying that, should it bother us?
I look at it like this. Would you walk up to a Native American person on the street and go, hey, what's up, Redskin?
I would not.
No. So why would you do that as a team name in a sports team? You would acknowledge that in a person-to-person setting, it would be a slur. It would be something you probably wouldn't throw somebody else's way. I feel weird even saying it. It feels even more wrong saying it in that regard in this setting on radio, and yet we casually do it with the name of a sports team almost every day in the name of it being a part of the NFL.
Because people don't associate it with walking up to a Native American and say, hey, what's up, Redskin? And they're talking about, well, when we say that, we're talking about football players on a field. But I'm just telling you, I'm just saying that's the thought process of people. I'm not talking about Native Americans here. I'm talking about the players that represent the Washington Redskins. So in their mind, but I'm just saying.
Oh no, I get
in their mind, they're not walking up to a Native American and saying that to his face.
Well, but again,
his or her face.
Yeah,
but that goes to the entire point of, do you understand it from somebody else's perspective?
Exactly right.
The weirdest thing about this whole thing. The weirdest thing is the timing and how this is playing out, and we'll get to that in a minute, and why it's the sort of the issues and the statements that Major League Baseball put out as to why they're getting rid of it, because they find it offensive, yet they're still going to allow it in 2018.
Right. Golic and Wingo, the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Trey Wingo and Mike Golic Sr. Going back to the topic we discussed or started talking about in Major League Baseball, Chief Wahoo will be removed from the Cleveland uniforms and won't be on the field anymore starting in 2019. And we're like, okay, I think the thought process we all had, if you've come to this place where you think that it is not right for him to be there, why are you giving him a farewell tour, essentially? And here is the interesting sort of legal standpoint. Why it's going to be 2019. Major League Baseball and the Indians opted to have the caricature removed from the on-field uniforms next year, but the logo will still have a limited retail presence in Northeast Ohio and Goodyear, Arizona, in order to maintain control of the trademark, ensuring that another group could not seize it and profit. The Indians need to retain some level of retail involving the logo.
Yeah, if I'm reading this, correct me if I'm wrong on this. You brought it up. For if you lose a trademark, others can have that trademark, make the same stuff, and all of it could be worn We're at the Indians games.
Yeah, this actually briefly happened in Washington with the Redskins when they lost the rights on that trademark when it was deemed an offensive logo, and they lost that, so other people were able to use that exact image on shirts. So what would then be stopping a group of angry Indians fans who were upset about the loss of Chief Wahoo from licensing and using that logo themselves to make shirts and then flood the stadium with
So
them?
basically the thought is to put it on limited merchandise outside of the players' uniforms to keep hold of the trademark so somebody can't mass make it.
In the area, not in the, like they wouldn't be selling that merchandise in the stadium or anything like that. It would just be enough to satisfy the terms of the trademark.
The legality of it.
Yeah.
But then you could look at this and say, okay, so you guys are getting rid of this because it's offensive, but you're still going to be selling the merchandise and making money off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can look at it that way, but from a legal standpoint, I think I understand what they're trying to do to make sure it isn't put out there in mass.
Yeah,
right?
because that's what somebody would do, right?
For sure,
without question.
But it's still strange that we have like a leap year in the middle where it's going to still be on the teams.
And that's the part that I think some people are having a problem with, including your friend and our compatriot here, Mina Kimes, said this about the basically lack of like a 12-month grace period for Chief Wahoo.
The jig was up on this when people in baseball years ago admitted that it was offensive and that they've been phasing it out as though it's not a binary between offensive and inoffensive. I don't know why it's taking a year to retire. I mean, does racism need a retirement tour? Do we all have to look at this thing another year for some reason? My only hope is that they show it in all of its grotesqueness and comment on it and are honest about it over this next years so that players and fans can see the logo for what it is, which is disgusting.
So again, that logo is going to be out there
for another year.
But on uniform, but longer than that. Yeah. It's going to be out there so that they can hold on to the trademark again so somebody else can't mass produce it. So it's still going to be out there. And so, but the question is, why does it have to be on the players' uniforms this year?
That's what I don't understand.
Somebody tweeted in saying, well, they can't change the logo until 2019 because all the uniforms have already been bought for this season. Seriously, dude? Seriously? They don't make enough money that you can't change 25 uniforms to take the logo off? I mean, come on. Stop it. I mean, if they wanted to make the uniforms not have Chief Wahoo on it, they could do it this year, right?
And I think that might even be speaking to the merchandise uniforms that you sell to fans that would have the players for this year with that Chief Wahoo logo on it, to which my result is that gives you the opportunity to create even more jerseys and more merchandise, I would imagine, albeit that would be on short notice. Maybe that's difficult, but this is all about controlling what you control, right? To your point, the merchandise, even after this year, is still going to be out there in circulation. You're going to be able to get your hands on it if you're a fan, if you want. It's about the team controlling their end.
So let me ask this general question, and we only have a couple of minutes here, because it does, a lot of people do say this. And this is from Neil, and he wants to know, this is a question for everybody, and you answer it in your own way. Where do we stop being offended? Atheists, angels, saints, PETA, animal mascots? A few years ago, pirate ancestors filed a grievance against ECU. So where does it, if I guess back to what I heard Will Cain talk about it, if one person is offended, that's enough. I disagree. I believe I would disagree with that.
He was saying the opposite, that one person should not be the one. He's absolutely the other way there.
Where does this
That's
go?
An excellent question, and I don't think any of us can have the exact answer for that. The question then becomes, for me, especially, I can only speak to specific things, okay? Generalities never work in these discussions,
right?
Because that's a vague cloud that, where's the line?
Right.
That's great, but you know what? We can find the line one thing at a time. I hate when people say, well, it's a slippery slope. Okay, but let's try that and see what happens. I mean, no one's saying we have to go all the way in on everything. Let's just take this one at a time and see where we stand on this thing. And if we come to a conclusion on that, we'll move on to the next one. But this vague, well, where do we draw the line thing, that's just an easy out to me.
Yeah, the slippery slope is a nice way to try and halt any and all progress.
We're not doing anything.
You can find a way to do that. My response would be, mascots is sort of the perfect area for this, right? Because what matters less in the grand scope of life than a mascot? Like, we get people all the time in this, well, I'm Irish and I'm offended by the Notre Dame leprechaun. Change it tomorrow. I don't give a damn. Because when I identify with something like that, the one thing I love in the way that fans love their teams is Notre Dame. You know how far down on the list that stupid leprechaun is?
Notre Dame.
Yeah, it's still Notre Dame. It's still the Dome. It's still the place that made me who I am. It's all of these things without that one thing. So we're talking about an area that's comparatively low stakes and things that we're talking about that are still clearly defined as racial slurs, as racist caricatures. Like those things to me seem inarguable in this, and that's reason enough.
See, I get that part of it, but then there are others who are offended by other things. So I guess that's the question
but
this person is bringing up.
That sounds like a generic, there's these other things that we're offended with. Look, if you can find me one thing specifically, we can talk about that as well. This seems pretty cut and dried to your point, Mike. Going back to those old cartoons, those would never be made today. Yeah. And that's a good thing that they wouldn't be made today. This one seems pretty clear.
It's one of the things we see all the time when we see an old movie. We're like, boy, you couldn't make that movie today.
Yeah, you cringe a little bit because you realize how insane it is. This is that on a baseball uniform.
So, again, it'll have a going away period in 2018, and then it will be gone from the uniform in 2019.
Golic and Wingo, the podcast.
What a day, what a show, what a time.
I tell you what, a great sports night last night, no doubt about it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Adrian Wojnarowski dropping another bomb before the deadline last night as he's with us now on Golic and Wingo on ESPN Radio and ESPN2, presented by Progressive Insurance. And slowly, I say, all phone guests join us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Adrian inside the studio to bring us the Straight Talk by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, no contracts. So that song, Gap Band, brought back some memories for you, right?
The parking lot at Bristol Pizza over on West Street in Bristol, where we used to hang out in maybe junior high, high school. I don't know what year. That's what I think of with that song.
Wow. Gap Band, drop a bomb on me. Baby. There you go.
It had no connotation other than
and now we use it in reference to you with all the info you get.
Yeah, I think that song is very appropriate. That should be your ringtone. That should be his ringtone.
I don't think so.
Well, he's like, shut up. Stop.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, outside of you and I'm sure some others, who saw this one coming? I mean, I know I didn't. All of a sudden, I'm watching SportsCenter and you're on the phone going, Blake Griffin's traded. I'm like, why? Are you kidding me? What led to this?
The Clippers and Pistons talked about a week ago for the first time about this deal, and it didn't go anywhere until Sunday evening is when it started to get serious and it started to move quickly. The Pistons, I mean, they've really been in a free fall, almost out of the Eastern Conference playoff top 8, and they were motivated to get a deal done. And the Clippers didn't know whether they would trade Blake Griffin if the right deal would come along. They certainly had been very focused on DeAndre Jordan, Lou Williams, but this was a deal for them that made sense, and both sides wanted to move fast on it.
I have to add, because I kind of feel like almost the Brock Osweiler deal when it went from Houston to Cleveland, and people are going, Cleveland did that? And Houston going, oh my God, we got rid of that money. It was that the same way in the Clippers? Were there any feeling of, wow, they actually took the deal and took all that money on in Detroit?
Well, I don't think it was so much that somebody would take Blake Griffin. I think there was and would have been tremendous interest in him. But, as Trey said going into the break, $35 million, $39 million annual salaries coming. It does lock them in with he and Drummond and their payroll. But they wanted a star in Detroit, and for a couple reasons. One, they haven't had that kind of veteran, grown-up superstar. They can't get a Blake Griffin in free agency, and they haven't drafted one. And they saw an opportunity in Detroit to get a star, and don't underestimate the importance of Blake Griffin as a ticket seller. They've got this big, beautiful new arena in downtown Detroit.
It really is nice.
And it's not been full, not even close. And so Blake sells tickets. He always has done that. That's part of it, but this is an all-in move for Stan Van Gundy and their regime. They've got to get in the playoffs, and they've got to show some progress here.
All right, ESPN NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski in with us talking about the Blake Griffin trade. It's interesting. The Clippers and the Pistons are really in the same spot right now. They're both one slot out of the playoffs right now. The Clippers are half game back of the Nuggets. The Pistons are 2.5 games back of the Sixers for the 8th slot. Does this trade, in your opinion, give them enough to get a push and get into the playoff picture?
Well, yes. And I think the question with Blake's going to be health. And he had the injury early this season. He has played well since coming back. And when he's healthy, when he's on the floor, he's going to really help that Detroit team. They hope that, he has played with DeAndre Jordan, they thought is sort of a relative facsimile to Andre Drummond, and he's played with a big center. He's not in this league, a 4-man who can go play the 5. He can't really defend that position as well. He's a 4-man, and he'll play that position in Detroit. And then for the Clippers, it gives them a chance now. They want to rebuild on the fly. They want to reshape the franchise. They don't want to drop. They don't want to drop into the lottery. Now listen, they may miss the playoffs here this year, next year, but they don't want to gut this roster. They want to now bring in younger players and draft picks to start reshaping this as they go. But Steve Ballmer doesn't want to tank. And this is the hard way to rebuild in the NBA.
So let me go one more in Detroit before we move out to LA. Is this where some teams are now? Of course, you want to win a championship, but also you see out there, we're not winning a championship. So let's do what we need to be relevant and sell tickets. Is that because you're Drummond and Blake are going to be 60, 70 mil, for the next few years of your roster. So is that where teams are now? Let's find a way to be somewhat relevant and have a guy that people talk about and sell tickets.
Well, I think in Detroit, given they have not had a star player there in a long time, really a cornerstone guy, they get that in Blake Griffin. But this is a team, Stan Van Gundy's run here, there's pressure to make the playoffs, and there's pressure now to not just make it, but maybe advance around, maybe have, become at least a middle-tier Eastern Conference team that's relevant. And for them, they can't get a second-team All-NBA type player through free agency. Like they did this in a smaller, and they've got a player in Griffin now who signed a 5-year deal this summer. They did this with Tobias Harris a few years ago. He was 1 year into a 4-year deal. And so you're getting guys with years to go on their contract who you kind of have under control now going forward. And it's a bit of a risky play for the Pistons, again, because of Blake's injury history. But listen, when he's healthy, tremendous player and the kind of veteran guy to sort of try to lead the way with a younger group trying to figure it out that they haven't had in Detroit.
Kind of trying to fit in with the forwards of today and shooting threes.
Right. He's doing that a lot more.
This year, yeah.
But to your point about the Pistons needing to sell tickets, they're filling about 83% of their available seats. Only the Hawks are worse. So this is a drive to get people to be interested in the team again.
Yeah.
And then on the Clippers side, where do the next pieces fall? Where does DeAndre go? Where does Lou Williams go? I mean, what do we think is happening before the deadline, which is a week from Thursday?
Well, after the Clippers made the trade yesterday, they thought that they would step back for a day or two, let the dust settle a little bit on this deal, and kind of reboot what's out there for Williams, for Jordan. They didn't love the trade market they had for DeAndre Jordan in this first go-around. I think there's a little pressure off of them now in the DeAndre deal by getting Blake done. They got two younger players. Tobias Harris is a young player still. Avery Bradley's, closer to 30, and he'll be a free agent this summer. But that first-round pick now they get from Detroit will certainly have value. Now, if you're the Clippers, you say, okay, if we can get a first-round pick for DeAndre Jordan and we can get one for Lou Williams, we already have 2 this year, our own and Detroit's. Now, maybe they get a pick that carries over into next year. They have a chance they could have 4 first-round picks in this coming draft if they got first for these 2. Now, those deals could include protections that push a first-rounder in 2019. But now they've got draft picks and a chance to get something they don't have in this organization, and that's good young players. They hit on a couple second-round picks, some 2-way contract players who played hard for them this year, but they need to start again to get some cornerstone young guys in the organization, and that's what their goal is over the next year or 2, and then try to be a player again in free agency, maybe 2019, 2020.
So, and let's go to free agency, but not 19 or 20. This summer, the biggest name out there, obviously LeBron James. What are realistic teams? Because we want to put them everywhere. Hell, Trey had the idea, and I agree. You want to be the best team out of the East and get a surefire road to play Golden State? You should go to Boston. Put LeBron in Boston. Let's figure out a way to get him in green.
I'm just saying he picked Kyrie Irving for the All-Star game. I'm just saying.
Group, that would be a bunch of 6'7", 6'8" guys everywhere.
Is he going to take the veteran minimum contract in Boston?
Like he needs more money. No.
But in a realistic sense, I mean, because people want to put LeBron everywhere to say this will fit here, this will fit here. Are there, in your mind, legitimate contenders for him. Unfortunately, for the first time in a long time, I'm starting to think of what's going on in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. He may really want to get the hell out of there, and I certainly don't want him to go as a guy born and raised in Cleveland. But are there, in your mind, legitimate teams out there that can make that run?
There are, and remember this too. Teams who don't have salary cap space now, if there's a chance to get LeBron, they can go out and create it. They can make deals. Houston is an example of that. Now, they can go out with Ryan Anderson. Now, Ryan Anderson's contract, $20 million a year. That's tough to move. They had trouble last summer when they tried to move it. But it's one thing to try to move it for Carmelo Anthony to create space. It's another thing to try to do it for LeBron. Now you are going to attach a first-round pick or maybe a first and a second, whatever it takes to get that contract off to help create space because it's LeBron James. But again, teams who may not look like they're in position to do it now, if they feel like there's a chance, if he has an interest, well, they'll go out and do it for LeBron. And so that always opens up the market beyond what you're looking at right now. But Cleveland, listen, they're preparing for the fact that he may very well leave. They had, I was told, most of their front office was at that Alabama, Oklahoma game. Right. I think almost their whole organization, including maybe even ownership, went down to take a look at that Trae Young, Colin Sexton battle. They're not looking to move that draft pick, and without moving that Brooklyn pick,
unless they know,
they can't. Yeah. And without moving that Brooklyn pick, they don't really have a chance to improve themselves at the deadline to get in to the conversation of being able to compete with Golden State. And even if they did, they're not one player away from anything.
Right. Clearly, LeBron is going to be the centerpiece of what's going to be a crazy NBA offseason again. The trade deadline is coming up again a week from Thursday. Adrian Wojnarowski, last question before we run out of time here. With the injury to Boogie Cousins, what does that do for his contract status for next year? And might that make Anthony Davis available now that it looks like whatever they were trying to get together with those two in New Orleans probably isn't going to happen?
They don't want to make Anthony Davis available. They're going to keep building around him. They still think they can make the playoffs. They'd still like to improve their roster. They don't have a lot of assets to do deals with. It'll make Cousins' free agency really interesting. How other teams approach that injury, how the Pelicans approach it. I think it helps the incumbent when there's an injury because you have them every day. Your doctors have access. You're watching the rehab. I think it's easier for the team to keep him versus somebody else to come in and sign an injured player to a multi-year deal. Right. So I thought all along that the Pelicans had a very good chance of re-signing him. And now whether it's a full 4 or 5 year deal, whether they do like a 1+1 with the injury, that's going to play out over the rehab here in the next few months.
Woj, you're the best. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Golic and Wingo, the podcast.
It was all sort of one big giant Jell-O mold. It's very interesting where that went.
Commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, and he joins us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Roger, thanks for being with us this morning. I know that tomorrow you give your annual State of the League address, as you always do in the Super Bowl city, so I guess we're getting a little bit of a sneak peek here. What can you tell us about what people can expect in the State of the League address tomorrow?
Well, first, guys, it's great to be with you. It's an honor to be with you. My first appearance on the Golic and Wingo show, so thank you for having me.
We thought about it long and hard. We decided, we'll let you on.
And before you answer that question, Commissioner, I know you speak in front of a lot of people, and I know one of the great things to do is always try and put them at ease. So when you get in front of all those people tomorrow, instead of starting with the State of the League, start with the fact that the night you're talking, there's going to be a supermoon, blue moon, and lunar eclipse all in the same night. I think you'll really freak them out.
Well, and I'm heading out to get a little of the Bold North this afternoon. We're going to be on a lake snowmobiling with some of the people in the host committee at Minnesota that did all the tremendous work for us there in Minnesota. So it's going to be a real Minnesota experience over the next 48 hours.
That sounds fun. Yeah, I dig this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, he's going to go ice fishing later. That's the other side.
I am.
You're being a little more active than he is, but he's got some issues that he's working through right now. But there have been some issues, Roger, that the league has been working through. So where would you assess the overall health and state of the league right now as we get set for Super Bowl 52?
Well, we really like our position. We think, the NFL content, the game itself, the experience that people get with NFL football is really what makes it all exciting for us, and we're thrilled with our position. Obviously, we have challenges, but we're excited about meeting those challenges and being better. And I think we're better today than we were before the season started, and we've had a great season and an exciting finish, and I look forward to a great Super Bowl on Sunday.
You know, one of the things about the year that has been talked about is the declining TV ratings. And I know for a lot of ratings have been down, but NBA has been up, even though the NFL ratings are still higher than everybody else's. They have gone down some, and we all go over the particular reasons for them. What do you think are the major reasons that the ratings have been down?
Well, I think there's no one specific thing, and as you say, it's across the board. Once in a while you see certain things that'll jump from time to time, but at the end of the day, I don't think anything could match the ratings experience of the NFL, not even close. We're 37 of the top 50 television shows, number one overall on Fox on Sunday afternoon of all television, number one on Sunday night. So we feel that the strength of our game is even getting stronger. But you always look to see what's happening in the industry. I think there are changes that are happening more rapidly than any of us ever thought in the television industry. But it still stands that the NFL game is standing above the rest of the crowd by a long shot.
Well, to that point, 64 of the top 100 shows were NFL games, and as you said, 9 of the top 10. And we actually saw that, Roger, with the Pro Bowl. It was up 26% over the last year in a monsoon, by the way, in Orlando.
Yeah, and you're right about that. And the thing that I still marvel at is, when I say 37 of the top 50, 10 years ago that was 11 out of the top 50.
Yeah, no.
So you talk about how obviously television has changed, but you see the dominance of the NFL continue, and that's something that we don't take for granted. We work hard every day to try to make it better. What can we focus on to make our game better?
There's no question it's still the surest thing on television. That's not a debatable point. One of the things, Roger, that some people look to for maybe a reason why there may have been a dip in the ratings this year was the social activism we saw in the anthem protests. But I found it interesting that you and the NFL have now partnered up with a new initiative with the players to be more active and more of a partnership with them in their social issues. How did you guys get to that point, and what's the outcome you guys are hoping for there?
Well, Trey, the key thing was listening to our players, understanding, what our players were passionate about, what they were focused on. And the incredible thing for me was it certainly opened my eyes, the ownership's eyes, to things that are happening in our own communities that our players felt needed to be addressed. They are not only articulate about it, they fully understand it. They are engaged. They've done a tremendous amount of work. And they believe we can make our communities better by working together. And the ownership was proud, and I was proud to join them, and not just understanding these issues and listening to their point of view, but supporting them and trying to say, here's the things that we would like to do in our communities to try to make our communities better for everybody and give voices to the voiceless and try to make sure that we're doing the things we should be doing in our communities as leaders.
Has that started? You guys together and what you've worked out, has that been put in process?
It started. We've done a lot of work. It's sort of in a few areas. One, there's a tremendous amount of work that's being done on legislative front, whether that's on the federal level or on the state or local level. That's something working with players that we've done. We've also done, and I've participated myself in what we call listen and learn tours, which is to try to get a better understanding from law enforcement's perspective what's going on in the communities, from the community leaders themselves, and just listening to them and understanding and trying to develop a better relationship. And then additionally, what we can do to help promote what our players are currently doing in their markets. And, there's a lot of focus on the Eagles, obviously, this week with the Super Bowl, but Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Golick and Torrey Smith have all been real leaders in their community as well as this effort.
Talking to Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner here on Golick and Wingo. Along those lines, I know when you met with them, it wasn't mandated that players don't kneel for the national anthem anymore. What are your expectations next year when the season starts as far as that goes?
Mike, our focus is going to be on creating this platform so that the players can continue to talk about the important work that needs to be done. We've often said we need to move from protest to progress, and this platform is that. This is what they sought. This is the type of activities that we all wanted to work together to try to promote and try to make an impact in our community. So we think this is going to be our focus, and this is something that they've all asked for.
Roger Goodell with us here on Golic and Wingo this morning. Roger, along those lines, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, for lack of a better term, about an ad that was denied in the Super Bowl program from some veterans asking people to please stand for the national anthem. What was the rationale behind that decision?
Well, we have a lot of ads in our game program, and there's a lot of people that negotiate and are involved with discussions about how to get involved with the Super Bowl program. We do have an ad from VFW supporting our veterans. The AMVET ad didn't come together after a lot of negotiations, but it's not any indication of any lack of support. Otherwise, we have a VFW ad that we think talks about and celebrates the important work that our veterans are doing. And, of course, you all know around the Super Bowl we'll have 15 Medal of Honor winners that we're going to bring together, which is, I think, the largest ever be brought together in any event other than their national and annual gatherings. So we're going to be celebrating our military and making sure that everyone understands the important work they do, as we always do around our game.
Just one more on that. I want to move on the field to the absolute hardest question we're going to ask you this morning.
Yes, by far.
Did you hear from a lot of or veterans, both because I know there were some that didn't like the players doing that, and others said we don't have a problem with the players doing that. Did you personally hear and talk to a lot of veterans about this?
I did, and not only that, met with several of them, including the national commander of the VFW. And, I think it's important to do that, and some of the players joined us in some of those meetings, and I think our clubs were very active on this front also. So it's important to listen and make sure there's a better understanding and what the players were saying as part of this protest as opposed to the way it's being portrayed sometimes in the public.
Roger Goodell with us, the NFL commissioner. And let's move on to a really easy question. Roger, what's a catch?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna try to work and clarify that in the off season. We had about 5 Hall of Famers come in a couple of weeks ago, and several coaches and our officials, and we all sat and spent a lot of time about how do we bring clarity to this rule so that everybody fully understands it. One of the things that stood out to me from one of the Hall of Famers is that fans want catches,
right?
And so let's try to make sure that we want to bring clarity to how the officials officiate it, so that obviously the coaches and the players know what to expect. But I think there's also, as great a job as the officials do, they're officiating around a rule that exists, and they're doing a great job with it. I think we got to look at the rule itself as, is it accomplishing what we want? And that's to, obviously bring that clarity to what a catch is. And I think there are several things that just had a long conversation with a head coach last night that I think are leading to some changes this spring that I think will address this issue.
Well, we're looking forward to that. And if I may interject one thought process there.
Oh, boy.
I would. I know. Like, really what you wanted to hear, some lame radio guy throwing in his opinion. But
Trey, you want a spot on the competition committee, don't you?
Done. I'm in. I've been sitting next to Bill Poley, and I feel like I'm smarter now. I would love there to be some equality in terms of what a catch is and possession across the goal line as opposed to a run. Because if you have possession of the football and it's a rush and you lean over the goal line, the ball knocks out, it's a touchdown. But if you catch the ball in the field of play and you have possession and you get to the goal line and it's knocked out or you don't survive the ground, it's not a catch. It would be great if we could have like that goal line demarcation be the same whether it's a run or a catch.
Trey, you make a really strong point, and it's what we call consistency, and that's what everybody wants from officiating. And it's hard when you see there's a different rule on a catch as you're crossing the goal line as opposed to a run. And I think the thing where we're really focused in on is this going to the ground and surviving the ground. I think that's what's caused a little bit more of the controversy, and that's the area that the committee is going to be focused on the next few weeks.
Quick follow-up from me. These 5 Hall of Famers you brought in, were they all wide receivers? Because the wide receivers, they're going to say if the ball touched their hands, it's a catch. I hope you brought in some secondary players as well.
Well, you'd be surprised because one of them was Chris Carter, and Chris, as you know well, actually has the exact opposite approach.
Really?
Chris thinks you should catch the ball and hand it to the official, and if you don't, it's not a catch. So he's got a very strong view, which he expresses incredibly well because he's one of the great ones and somebody I admire tremendously and respect tremendously. But we did have some defensive backs in there. We tried to get the perspective of everybody. And when you go through this kind of, I guess, work and focus, it's important to get that perspective, including the officials who were in the room, saying, what do I see at this play? So we looked over 50 plays from this past season and talked about different concepts and then apply it to it and see, does that work? Does that cover what we want? Because, again, I'm not sure the rule is accomplishing what we all intended to accomplish right now. And that's not the official's fault. That's our fault. We need to fix that rule.
Right. And I guess along those lines, it would play with it is it felt like you may have numbers to say it's not, but it felt like there were more replays as well, which took up more time as well. Is that the case? And are there thoughts of redoing any kind of the replay system at all?
Well, we always review the replay system, but you're right that there were more replay stoppages this year. They were shorter in duration, but there were still more interruptions on the replay, and I think we are trying to address that because, as you know, last year we spent a great deal of time on the game presentation, which was about reducing unnecessary stoppages and unnecessary delays, commercial delays, delays that really fans don't want to see. They want to see football in action. And not the kinds of delays that are officials conferencing. And so we did, I think, a terrific job in the first year and made some real positive changes, including reducing the length of the game by almost 2 minutes. But we need to do more, and I think we can do better, particularly in that area where the replays can be done, I think, a little more efficiently, and we also have to see if we can keep it from being such an imposition in the action of the game.
NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell with us this morning on Golic and Wingo. A little sneak peek of what he'll be talking about tomorrow. It's the State of the League. His annual address will be in Minneapolis at the site of Super Bowl 52. And I imagine, Roger, in light of the news that came out yesterday, this question might come up at the State of the League. Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred working with the Cleveland Indians to remove Chief Wahoo, the mascot, from the uniform. Some people deem that mascot racist, and it'll be phased out in a year. It will no longer be on their caps or their sleeves. Have you thought at all about working anymore with Dan Snyder about the issue with the Washington Redskins and the name of that franchise?
Well, Trey, as you know, this issue's been around for several decades, if not longer. And I think the interesting thing is Dan Snyder has really worked in the Native American community to understand better their perspective. And I think it's reflected mostly in a Washington Post poll that came out in the last year that said over 9 out of 10 Native Americans do not take that in a negative fashion, the Redskins logo or the Redskins name, and they support it. And so I think the focus that we've had is, in any way, is this insulting to the Native Americans? And I think that poll is overwhelmingly positive that they don't. I think the Redskins have done a tremendous amount of work here, and I think Dan continues to believe in the name, and I don't see him changing that perspective.
From that point, do you, the league office, and you in particular, hear from people about that? And if so, what influence can you have? As Trey said, Rob Manfred worked with Paul Dolan in Cleveland. Do you have the power to have him change it or strongly suggest it, or how does that relationship work in this instance?
Well, again, I think you start from the position of, what the reaction is of the Native Americans. And as I said, that's overwhelmingly positive about it. Second, I think you obviously ask Dan to listen and make sure you understand what the fans are saying, which he has. We have. We don't hear this very much from our fans, but we understand there are different perspectives on this, and we're sensitive to that and understand it, and we make sure that we do whatever we can to make sure we're presenting all of our teams in a positive fashion.
NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell with us this morning on Golic and Wingo, and obviously the Super Bowl is the pinnacle of the sports year. In a lot of ways, it's really a national holiday, Roger, that we don't recognize on the national holiday calendar in the U.S. And one of the biggest reasons is you don't have to have a dog in the fight to be interested. We had the stat, $4.76 billion will be bet in and around the Super Bowl. Another league, the NBA, is looking at the idea of maybe trying to work with gambling to sort of make it more cohesive with the sport. We have a team now in the NHL that's in Las Vegas. We have an NFL team that's headed there. Where is the relationship or the idea of the separation of the NFL and gambling right now as we're going forward?
Well, Trey, to me, it's very clear, which is about the integrity of a game. You don't want to do anything that's going to impact negatively on the integrity of our game. You want to be certain that there are no outside influences on our game and that fans don't even have any issue with that. They understand, whether there's a perception or not, that there is no influence in our game. And that's something that we stand firmly behind in the integrity of our game. We see changes going on. Obviously, I don't think 10 years ago most people would have looked at having an NFL franchise or an NHL franchise in Las Vegas. Clearly, there are changes occurring. The Supreme Court is considering changes potentially in laws with respect to gambling across our country. And I think we're going to be prepared as a league to address those, and no matter how the Supreme Court comes out, but also how things continue to evolve. And I think we have, but we're going to protect the integrity of the game. I assure you of that.
And I guess a follow-up on that for me would be, if just about all that money is illegally bet anyway, the integrity of the league, I understand, but if people wanted to get the players, they'd be doing it already. I mean, since most of the gambling is illegal already, if it's legalized and more quote unquote above board, I'm not sure. I'm trying to understand where that would hurt the integrity of the game as opposed to illegal bettors trying to influence players now.
Well, Mike, I think it depends a lot on what type of regulatory issues are implemented.
Right.
Second, I think there's a very significant consumer protection. We've seen that in other forms that I think we want to make sure that our consumers are protected. So there are a lot of issues that come with that make sure that there is security, there is confidence in the system. It just isn't throwing the doors open, and that's not. That's our biggest issue, because that affects our fans, it affects our players, it affects the confidence in our game. So that's the line we're going to continue to hold.
Understood. And so I guess maybe the biggest question, since it's the most immediate, is when you go snowmobiling, will you open it up all the way? I mean,
full throttle.
Will you full throttle this thing? Will you go that fast?
Guys, I'm going for it. Let's roll. So I'm going to go for it. I hear we're on a lake. So I'm assuming that it's frozen one.
One would hope. One would hope, Roger. One would hope. That would be key.
I think I'll let somebody else go first and follow behind. How's that?
There you go. I'm right behind you, 100%.
That's great.
Away.
So much room out on a lake. That's fantastic.
Yeah, right.
Well, I love the fact because Goal's going to go full throttle when he sits there and ice fishes too. So you both are going full throttle, just in different ways. Roger, we appreciate you being with us. We know you're busy, and we hope we give a little preview of everything you'll be asked tomorrow at the State of the League address.
Thanks, Roger.
I'm sure, and it's great to be with you guys, and good luck with the show. I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Roger. We'll talk to you later on this week.
Golic and Wingo, the podcast.
Let's not expect too much. There's only one person out there that's expecting way too much out of this guy too early. We know who that is. It's his father.
Roger Goodell, who was kind enough to join us the last segment, talking about a bunch of things in light of what's going ahead with his State of the League address, which will be done Wednesday in Minneapolis, site of Super Bowl 52. And again, he'll be speaking in time where you'll see that entire State of the League address on NFL Live. We'll have that for you. But it was interesting. We brought up the Redskins case, Mike, because of what's going on in Major League Baseball.
Right.
Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred is working with Paul Dolan, has worked with Paul Dolan, the owner of the Indians. In 2019, Chief Wahoo, the mascot face, the caricature face, bucktooth redskin face, will no longer be on the Indians' uniforms and not on the field. And so that's why we asked him about the issue with the Washington Redskins, and he did reference that poll, which came out in 2016, in May of 2016, in a Washington Post poll, which I was surprised by this. I really was.
Yeah.
That 9 in 10 Native Americans weren't offended by the Washington Redskins name.
I think it was a 500 some?
500 full people across every state.
I guess that's what and we had a good discussion, me, you, and my son Mike this morning when he was here about this, and that's questions from both sides. As I said, it doesn't affect me if the nickname goes away. If Chief Wahoo is not on the uniform anymore, I'm still going to watch it. If the Washington Redskins change their name to something else, I'm still going to watch them play. But on the other side of the questions I asked was, and a lot of people are asking, so who deems what offensive, and where's the line of saying, okay, this is so offensive, I now change it? Or are we in a society now where if it even gives a hint of it, change it before any backlash happens? So as we even talked about it a lot in the break, me, you, and my son, is why do we can sit there and say we don't like it, but the people it's supposed to be offending, if they do a poll and of Native Americans and they don't mind it, then how do we say, well, do we say it doesn't matter what you say, it should be changed anyway because it's offensive? And I understand you saying it being offensive. Is 500 not enough? What if the poll was 5,000 Native Americans and 8 out of 10 said they weren't offended? Then should that end the story to you? I guess that's the question for everybody, is where is your line of it offending you? Does it offend the people that we think it's supposed to offend? And what are their thoughts about it?
Well, to that point, there were some people that didn't agree with the findings in the Washington Post, and one of them was Susan Harjo, a lead plaintiff in a case challenging Washington's trademark protections, which, by the way, were taken away but then reinstated. She said, I just reject the results. I don't agree with them. I don't agree that this is a valid way of surveying public opinion in Indian country. But other people, including a leader of the Oneida Nation, said North Americans are resilient and have not allowed the NFL's decade-long denigration of us to define our own self-image. So this one is a little more, I think, complex.
Right.
Because you can't look at that picture of Chief Wahoo. Well,
Chief Wahoo, there's a picture, an actual illustration to look at that and say, oh yeah, this was meant, and it's not offensive,
right?
By looking at it, and then there's a name, Washington Redskins, which we see the logo that had been on the helmet for years as well. Like I said, time is not an excuse. Because it's always been that way doesn't mean it always should be that way.
Lawyer will tell you that's the worst argument you can ever make.
I'm with you, and at some point, enough builds up. So in this age of social media and everybody having a voice and it being heard immediately, things can build up quicker. How many jump on the backs of that? Don't really have a care either way, but jump on it just because it's a cause? I don't know the answer to that. And then how many people are offended by something else? An angel, a devil, a pirate, something like that. And who do you go to then? Who do you take a poll of then? That this is, if I'm offended by it. So take a poll if these people associated with it should be offended by it. I don't know.
Well, you're right. It is an unknown. I just think that it's never whenever you get to a point where you realize this doesn't make sense, it's never a bad idea to get to that
I
time.
agree,
Yeah.
but I guess I'll say again. Not everybody. People want the Washington Redskins name changed, and they asked Native Americans who it offends, and 9 out of 10 said they didn't have a problem with it.
This was one poll in the Washington Post.
One poll.
Yes. There have been other polls that have showed the other way. We just brought that up because I know he's going to get asked that question tomorrow in light of what's going on in Cleveland.
So I'd like to see the other polls. I'd like to see other things that are out there that go. And again, I'm just playing devil's advocate and asking the questions here.
The other things that we talked about with him, and again, he'll answer those tomorrow. We'll hear those when he does that live on NFL Live for us. Two of the things that I think a lot of people drove crazy this past year. One of them was, what is a catch and what isn't a catch? And Roger admitted, hey, we're going to be reviewing that one more time.
As great a job as the officials do, they're officiating around a rule that exists, and they're doing a great job with it. I think we got to look at the rule itself as, is it accomplishing what we want? And that's to, obviously bring that clarity to what a catch is.
And obviously Steelers fans will be like, yeah. And a lot of other people would be as well.
The first thing is make it easier to define for the referees, because that is true. With all the rule changes out there, even the safety rules, the officials are in an impossible spot. They're going to throw the flag for safety a lot quicker than normal. So that's kind of put on them by the league. And the same thing here, because that rule is so in my opinion, complicated from out of bounds to in the middle of the field to the goal line to simplify the damn thing and make it easier on the people who have to be on the field making the call.
Yes, and it's the fact that he's doing this week. Remember, one of the greatest catches in Super Bowl history would not have been a catch by the rule today. It was Super Bowl 12, the Cowboys over the Broncos 27-10. It was a close game in the I think in the third or fourth quarter. Roger Staubach leans back and throws a 50-yard bomb to Butch Johnson. Butch Johnson makes the catch, has possession of the ball over the end line, and drops it, or the ball comes loose. But because he had possession crossing the goal line, he didn't have to survive the ground.
Right.
It was a touchdown.
Back then, you didn't have to survive the ground.
And back then, that wasn't an issue, and that would not have been – that was a game-breaking play, a back-breaking play in that Super Bowl. That would not have been allowed today, and the commissioner also alluded to that. This surviving the ground thing has become a real mess.
I think the thing we're really focused in on is this going to the ground and surviving the ground. I think that's what's caused a little bit more of the controversy, and that's the area that the committee is going to be focused on the next few weeks.
Yeah. Good luck with that. Yeah. I loved what he said. Chris Carter is one of the people they brought in, and Chris said, hand the ball to the official, and then it's an official catch. Yeah. Obviously, we know that's going too far, but they do need to come up with something much simpler than what's going on right now.
And look, one of the things that stood out to me this year, and I love a lot of people point to the Jesse James play in the Steelers-Patriots game, and I get that. To me, week 2, there was a play by Sterling Shepard. He was crossing against the Eagles in the end zone, right to left. He caught the ball in the end zone. He took 3 steps in the end zone with possession of the ball and then was pushed out of bounds. And he's falling forward. So he dove about 7-8 yards out of bounds after having possession of the football with 3 steps in the back of the end zone. And after the push, he fell down and the ball came out of bounds. That was ruled an incomplete pass. Yeah. That one to me was the
Well, again, you didn't. According to their rule, you didn't survive the ground.
But he was in the end zone with 3 steps in possession.
I agree with you.
I'm not a Giants fan. I'm just saying that one is like, come on.
I completely agree with you.
Everyone knows that's a catch.
And that's why
everyone knows that's a catch.
That's why they all know that's something that they have to work on this year, and they have to get it squared away. And hopefully they will. Hopefully that will be something they do, because what that did, it certainly added to replays, that's for sure. The amount of replays, which the commissioner even said there were more replays this year than there were the previous year, even though they were shorter in length. But there were more replays, and that's just one thing. You just kind of drop your head and go, God, another replay. Because forgetting even the challenges, they replay every touchdown, or I believe touchdowns are replayed anyway. So it just has to be so much more defined, well-defined, and mainly so the referees can have an easier time making the call.
This has been the Best of Golic and Wingo podcast. Make sure to subscribe on the ESPN app, Apple Podcasts, and to listen every weekday morning at 6 Eastern on ESPN Radio, ESPN2, and the ESPN app.